think that's the name for it, of a new forecast. I'm just gonna say my opinion is I love this. I'm gonna let you talk about it, but this brings the probability up to 90, which is a huge jump. So can you tell us what is, what that is, and where people can find that? Is it possible for them to find that as well?
Sure, there is going to be a new experimental cone this year. It's going to be on the Hurricane Center website with each and every advisory. And it's basically, as you mentioned, it's now a 90% cone, meaning that it's really the likely path of the center of the storm and how we constructed that. And it doesn't make the cone much wider. I think some people thought when we went from 67 to 90 that it was going to make the cone this really wide and expand it. But what we did was we really have looked at our errors, and we do this every year. We looked at our errors versus the timing errors, how fast or slow were the forecasts compared to the storm motion, and then how much left and right. And we actually have a little bit greater error typically with timing than we do with the left and right. So when we did the 90% cone, it did not make the cone much wider. It's just a little bit wider on each side. It's really hardly even noticeable if you go compare them, but it does make the cone a little bit longer, again, because there's more of this timing uncertainty. And that's something that we really weren't able to convey much with the previous cone. So it actually not only again makes us now a likely path cone versus a probable, but it also then accounts for some of that timing uncertainty that we really didn't account for before.
So Daniel, Joe's a huge fan of this cone. It's in the experimental phase for a little while. Like, what would be the process be, or how long do these experimental phases, last? Where maybe 1 year, 2 years down the road from now, this will be the new core product, if you will.
Yeah, so our experimental products it's usually a year or two. I can tell you that we've gotten a lot of positive feedback already on this cone. So I feel like if we continue to see that, if the response is and feedback is as positive as it's been, I feel like it is something that we will probably want to make operational as quickly as we can, which could be as early as next hurricane season.
Wow, that'd be great. And just with the image that the Hurricane Center you guys provided, you're right. I mean, it's not much bigger. It's a little wider and a little more longer, but I mean, I would imagine this would be a typical 66% probability cone maybe 5 years ago or something like that. I'm just making it up. But just to hammer this one more time and then we'll move on. Talk to us about the improvement in the cone. Like, could you give us like something that we always talk about here being in New Jersey is Sandy in 2012, right? Like if Sandy was to happen today, like in the course of about 15 years, how much did that cone shrink?
It's shrunk quite a bit, but from about 2005 to 2015, it was cut probably by about 40%. Would be about
Yeah.
my guess. It
Yeah.
really did shrink quite a bit. Since that time, it has narrowed, but not nearly as much as it did in that previous decade. And that's, track forecasts continue to improve, but we've seen the rate of improvement start to slow a little bit. There is some theories that we can get to what's called limits of predictability, where you just aren't going to make much more progress. But one thing I will say, and to throw this out too, is I think last year as we started to incorporate some of the AI models, we actually saw some improvements in our track forecasting ability by now having more of these models available. And so I do think there still could be some improvements that we see with track forecasting, which means that the cone is likely to continue to narrow for at least a few more seasons.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, better data and information is going to protect us all, right? So that's always good.